and I felt this ice cold feel. And this guy walked into the restaurant, and I was almost in the back, but not quite, staring at the door in one of those booths. And he comes up, steps right next to my chair, and blew the guy behind me away. And I remember everything inside of me screaming, "Don't look, don't look!" But I couldn't help but look up, where this gunshot had just been fired right next to my head.
Welcome to Creepalachia. Today we are having a sit down and talking to a local, you say Leicester? Or where?
Yeah.
Yep, from Leicester. Dana Sloan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for making the trip out in this part blizzard. I mean, did you live in West Virginia in like mid-90s?
No, I moved here in 2000.
2000? Well, mid-90s, there was like 2 feet that dropped. So that's technically a blizzard, but this is a lot of snow. But go ahead and introduce yourself to the folks and a little bit of background about you, if you don't mind.
A little bit of background. Well, I'm Dana Sloan. I'm an import from, essentially I came here from Missouri. Before that, I was in California for about 30 years. But I was born in Montana on a revival.
Oh, wow.
My dad was a tent preacher for a long, long time, and I was born in Bozeman, Montana, because my mom wanted to go on the trip. And she didn't tell my dad that the doctor wasn't in when he told her to go make sure it was okay. So I popped in 20 minutes after they got to Bozeman. And but I was supposed to be born in Laramie, Wyoming. Spent a good part of my youth in Wyoming. So that's why winters kind of look lightweight to me here. But at the same time, I didn't learn to drive in any kind of snow until I moved here. So actually Missouri, but so it's different. The blizzard's kind of different. So going up and down Rock House Road is kind of weird. Sure. But anyway, my background is for a long time I ran produce out of the Salinas Valley. If you eat iceberg lettuce, various things like that, I ran produce out of the Salinas Valley on the docks. I wasn't a truck driver, and then I got blown away from that after my addiction got a hold of me too bad, and ran the streets, ripped and run for a couple of years, and then finally checked into a treatment center. Got clean for about 30 days. Got loaded with a Jesuit priest that I was a roommate with in the treatment center on the way home from graduation, and over the next 11 months, I was bouncing in and out of recovery and jail. And about sometime late November 1988, I finally went on what I hope to God is my last run. And
what year did you say it was again?
November of 1988. I celebrate on December 1st because I really don't have a clue what exact day that I finally quit. All I know is I went out to work one day. I was actually employable and employed. So something in that treatment had helped me along the way. But I still weighed like 120, 115 pounds at that point. As you can tell, that's a lot different than what I am now.
Hey, you look good, brother.
And anyway, I was on my way to work. I don't remember anything good going on. There wasn't anything bad going on. There was just another day in the life. I was on my way to go to work. And to this day, I can't tell you what happened. I don't know if I had stopped at a stop sign and one of my old brothers says, "Hey, brother, let's try some of my new stuff," and handed it to me. I don't know if I stopped at the liquor store and the bottles talked to me. I have no idea, what happened. All I know is about 6 or 8 or 10 days later, I came back to myself, and I was hitting on this coke crack pipe and sitting in a friend of mine's dining room, kitchen, whatever you want to call it. And I remember this pop went off into my head, and I remember just kind of this bliss came all over my body. And I just kind of went, "You know what, Gene, this is the moment. This is what I get loaded for." I was chasing the bag and I finally had caught it. And next thing I know, he's picking me up off the floor where he just spent 15 minutes getting my heart started again. And he put me back down in the chair that I'd just fallen out of. And he says, "Man, you ain't going to die in my house." He went to go get his coat. He's going to take you to the hospital. And when he left the room, he'd set me in the same chair that I'd just fallen out of. So everything was sitting right in front of me, just like it had been before. And I'm a good dope fiend, man. I just reached out and started hitting that thing again. He came back into the room with me, banging on that pipe. And he said, "You ain't going to die in my house." He slapped it out of my hands, picked me up, and threw me out of his house.
Wow.
And that was when it dawned on me, how did I get here? I'd been on my way to go to work 11 days earlier, so I was in the same clothes, same everything from 11 days before. Had not stopped anywhere, hadn't gone to sleep, hadn't done anything. As far as I can tell, I was just out for about 11 days.
Swing that mic up to you just a little closer if you don't mind. Okay. And it's already interrupted. Swing it, bring it towards your mouth. Yep, there we go.
Anyway, that was sometime late in November, sometime after Thanksgiving is all I can tell you. Mm-hmm. I went, my brothers had figured out decades before that I was in trouble with the chemicals, and they had picked me up they didn't know what else to do. So they hauled me to an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting in 1972. And they were good people, but I was too young and I was bulletproof. You know, kids are bulletproof when they're young. They don't have any destruction in them. They don't think that they're going to die. So I really was not interested in what they had to offer. And they were talking about God and that hokey, bunch of steps they had. And I was just, I was nice enough to stay until they got to the end. And then we checked back out of there. And my brothers apologized for taking me into that cult, they thought. Anyway, I bounced in and out for a long, long time into the 12-step. That was the first people and the only people that I'd ever found that had ever lived a life like me and gotten out of it. And so I knew about them at that point. And it kind of messed with my addiction from there on because I knew there was a way out. I just wasn't willing to take it because they kept talking about God. And being a preacher's kid, I knew that I'd gone too far away from God. And I was unsavable. And so that's kind of my addiction story. I mean, I've been in a lot of alleys and gutters and things. The guy named Ben Fuller wrote a song called Chasing Rebels. And his opening line is, "I ain't one to hide my stupid and my stubborn. I won't lie about the alleys where I've been. I ain't never going to try to cover all the lies that put me under, nearly buried in a box of my own sin. This freedom that I've found is not a platform for me to boast in anything that I have ever done. It's just a messy canvas, God's mercy in my madness, and a fiery love that I could not outrun." And that's essentially where my life is I finally got caught and I started doing the things they told me to do. And despite the fact I did not believe that they were going to believe it was going to ever work on me, I thought that maybe if they got back there and I did all the game that they told me to do long enough, they would figure out I was cool and they would come tell me the real secret. So far, it's been 36 years plus.
Yeah, good for you. Well, and obviously, I found you I wanted to find someone to speak on, kind of the details of addiction and to kind of attempt to break the stigma because, obviously across the nation, addiction is an issue, but especially in Appalachia. And that's how I found your name. You're actually running an AA program.
No, currently? I attend Narcotics Anonymous.
Gotcha. You attend. Gotcha.
And you actually met me through a girl who, I believe her job actually puts her in touch with people like us early in recovery, and she helps them to find resources. And she reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested. So I called you up and we talked.
Yeah.
That made me my interest peaked a little bit, but I'm not really big into glory stories. There's nothing glorious about addiction. It's one of the worst things that has ever entered our population, and it's always been here. There's been addiction to something, alcohol or something beyond that, ever since the beginning of man.
Sure.
And, there's some of us that just have this unfortunate proclivity of, I don't know if it's genetic or what, but some of us just can't quite live in our own skin without some kind of help. And for me, a long, long time, it was substances. It was various substances. I started out with the big designer drugs, the beginner drugs, alcohol and tobacco and pot. And of course, I was in California in the late 60s. So that was a perfect time to go to California. That was when the old man moved us there.
Right.
And so everything was accessible all the time to me. And I finally got to where I couldn't stand myself the way I was living with some things, and so I would try to kick it by doing something else. And I always thought that it was just that one drug, and so if I could get rid of this one, then I'd probably be okay. And then it would be the next one. And if I could just get rid of this one, and by the end I was doing them all.
Yeah. Do you remember what why you initially turned towards drugs early on? Is there something you can kind of point to? I mean, 36 years, I'm sure you've thought about things in detail. I'm curious.
I can tell you that somewhere along the line, back then it was cool. Like I said, I was in California in the summer of '67. When we moved there, that was when we moved there, and my brothers hauled me off to go see Monterey Pops.
Mm-hmm.
They hauled me to go see Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and all those people about 20 miles from our house.
Oh, wow.
And I got lost into being cool with those people. And my brother was both of my brothers were interesting characters in their own right. I don't want to go into their story, but basically they were the first ones to get me high. And then right about that same time, I was in school, and they started doing what they called drug education back then.
Mm-hmm.
And they showed a brief part of, what do they call it? Reefer madness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
yep.
This guy took about 3 hits off of a joint or a pipe or something in the movie, and then he walks over and he watches his whole face melt on the screen. I don't know if you remember that little brief moment. But that's what they used in the drug rehab thing and in the drug education class. And good Lord, I knew that was not true. And so I figured if they would lie to me about that, they would lie to me about everything.
Sure.
So I became susceptible to do whatever. That's the one.
Yeah, Reefer Madness. I got it here on the screen. We'll bring it up here. This was made in 1936. I didn't realize it was that old.
All this stuff's been around a long, long time. I think that's the guy who's going to go hit.
So this was their training material in the.
That was what they were using for drug education. Now watch, this guy takes about 3 hits. He's all oh look, oh, and then he runs over and he walks into the. He'll walk over eventually after they get done showing all this stuff, and he'll see himself in the mirror, and his face starts to melt.
Oh, gotcha.
Really weird out.
Which this is the trailer, so I don't know if they have they have the full hour and 8 minutes.
Yep.
On online. So yeah, and how old were you when you were watching this?
13.
So did it kind of have the reverse effect? It was
because like I said, I figured if they would lie to me about that, they would lie to me about all of it. And so the next time I even considered society and their norms and how it affected with my addiction was somewhere in the mid 80s. Nancy Reagan started the little Just Say No program.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching TV as she announced it, with a bottle in my hand, and she was talking about just say no. We need to teach them all to just say no. And I remember tears started pouring out of my face because I realized how out of touch I was with society, because there was no way I could just say no. I had no idea what no would have been like, I couldn't understand what a life without any kind of chemicals was going to be like. And it was my way of life. I mentioned to you on the phone when we first talked that in one of my car crashes, because I used to drink a lot, things used to jump up and bite the front end of my cars off as I was driving down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a crash up against a grammar school cafeteria. The road teed, and I just ran right over the stop sign and the end of the road sign, and just went straight on into this thing. No skid marks anywhere on the grass, and ran right into the side of this grammar school cafeteria. And the next thing I know, I wasn't even actually there during the wreck. I just kind of did that. But I was sitting, next thing I knew, I was like sitting in this tree or outside of this tree, but I was way up high, looking down at this poor sot down in the car, this drunk. And I thought, what a poor miserable bastard, There must be some kind of help for somebody like that. And all of a sudden it dawned on me that that was me down there.
Hmm.
And I had a couple of more thoughts that I can't quite remember or describe, but all of a sudden it dawned on me that if that was me, I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how I could possibly get loaded and how I would be able to survive in the next life. And so I just immediately just wished I could be back. And the next thing I know, I was waking up in a hospital intensive care where they had patched me back together and enough to be at least in intensive care and be stable. I spent 6 days. I was having a particular issue with my ex-wife at that point, and I'd gone out to literally intentionally get as blasted as I could. And when I came to, I spent 3, 4, 5 days, 4 days in the hospital. They wouldn't give me anything for pain because their fear about my blood alcohol was so much overriding what they couldn't figure out why I was still breathing. It's like 0.46 or 0.48 or something to, outrageous. And they spent 3 or 4 days just waiting for me to sober up enough before they could do surgery to put my face back together, my knees back together, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was a normal life. That was kind of how I had developed. I spent my entire adolescence getting high and loaded, and it just crescendoed and kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, wrapped around, my whole body was wrapped around it, and my mind and heart and spirit and everything was just wrapped up in this addiction. And the only way I could ever get out of one was to start doing another one. And my first addiction that I kicked was cross-top Benny pills, it's a form of speed. And I kicked that by doing Eli Lilly's 451, whatever, Reds, phenobarbital. And so I went straight from uppers to downers. To get off of the uppers, I would use the downers. And then later on, I started doing some other drug to kick the Reds. And I mean, everything just kept on going on and on and on. By the end, I was doing it all.
Did you, early on, did you have a preference to alcohol versus, pills versus, how did...
I've always been I used to describe it as a great drinker. I've always drank a lot. From the very first time, I always drank a lot. I guess it's the only drug that stayed with me virtually all the way through. I did have a 4 or 5 year part with it. I'd come to the point where I thought I was done. Couldn't do this anymore. And I went to AA and asked for help. And they poured me a cup of coffee, about a quarter full, because I was shaking so bad. I was sloshing it out of the cup. So I kind of got a resentment over them giving me a partial cup until I realized I couldn't hold it anyway. But basically they taught me to replace my bottle with that coffee cup. And which I still have today, man. There's a cup sitting in the car right now, right. 30 ounce Yeti. But anyway,
caffeine. I love it.
I've never drank caffeine like that before. And so, and they taught me to come early, hang out with the fellas, stay late after the meeting, hang out with the fellas, drink coffee and talk about the program. They poured coffee all the way through the meeting at the tables where I was at, and I can't blame them because they were just trying to help me out. But the bottom line is I had a job at that point. I was still working in produce. I had to be up at like 4:30 in the morning because the Eastern markets open up at like 8 o'clock here, and that's 5 o'clock in the morning in California. I had to have an inventory in by 5 o'clock so that the sales office would know what they had to sell and what they needed to cut, et cetera, et cetera. And so early morning, man, and I'd get out of these meetings at 9:30. I'd hang out with the fellas for another half hour or for an hour, whatever. After the meeting, I'd get home at like 11 o'clock and I'd be amped on this caffeine, man. And I had no idea what to do with that, and I couldn't get to sleep. And I remembered that my wife probably still had a stash of that non-habit forming marijuana crap that I've deluded myself into thinking, well, nobody's in AA talking about that, so I figured I could get away with it.
Sure.
And, so I started taking a couple of hits, and I thought I was better. And I was better. I was light year. I wasn't puking blood on my feet every morning when I got out of bed, heading to the shower. I was light years ahead of where I had been. And I had maintained that for about 5 years, although I did back off of the meetings because she kept on complaining. it's not any better because you're never home anyway. You're always hanging out with the people at the meetings, blah, blah, blah. And so, I started backing away. I went from 8 meetings a week to 6 and then 4 and then eventually none. And, but I still maintained for a long, long time. And I thought I was really good. I thought I was still making it, although I was a little agitated with, life at home. And I had nothing to treat this disease that I was carrying. And so one day I was at work and I was doing that early inventory, and this USDA inspector came around to look at a green onion order that I was shipping to the military. And, she liked what she saw and she stamped all the boxes she needed, blah, blah, blah. And I gave her one of my hats from my company, and I was walking out to my car, and I was walking her out to her car, excuse me. And, just, being social. And I'd known her for years, but this had never come up before. But all of a sudden she said, "Do you do coke?" And this one side of my head said, "You swore you'd never buy any of that stuff again." And this side over here says, "Well, she's just trying to be social. She ain't trying to sell you anything." And it's like, "This is not a good idea," blah, blah. And everything about me had an idea that it was not a good idea. But I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll be social." And so she pulled out one of those cute little bullets that we had in the 80s, one's little dinky spoons about the size of your white of your fingernail, and up one nose and up the other. And she puts it all back away, heads off down the road, have a nice day. And by the end of that day, I was sitting on a 1/4 pound of cocaine and 2 pistols.
Wow.
That's how fast it just exploded again back into.
Is that the first time you relapsed?
That was essentially the one that dropped me into treatment. So it was getting close to the end, but it was about a year and a half before I finally quit.
Gotcha.
Everything. But that was essentially the first time I relapsed was when I picked up that joint to take the edge off the caffeine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, that was the beginning of the relapse. Relapse is not using necessarily, it's the mental state that's taking you there. And that's what a lot of people mistake, is they don't think that they've got relapsed until they get loaded. Now, as far as my clean time is concerned, I still get my coin every year, and my coin says 36 years. But there's been a lot of times where the madness has come on me. I just haven't gotten loaded.
Right.
I've done other stupid things. And that's the problem with addiction is if we treat it just as it's the alcohol, it's the cocaine, it's the opiate, it's the whatever. Once you quit one, then another one pops up. It could be sex, it could be gambling, it could be all kinds of different things. And that's why there's a myriad of 12-step programs, because a lot of people fall into this trap of they quit this and they go into that, and I used to do it with just different drugs, but eventually it turned into sex. It turned into a whole lot of other stuff. And so,
yeah, I think, is that your phone?
Yeah, it was an alarm for medication.
Oh, do we need to?
No, I took it while I was out in the car before I came in.
Oh, okay.
If I can make sure it doesn't come back, though, it'll come back in 8 minutes or 9 minutes, a minute.
Hey, take your time. So I'm curious about, you mentioned about overdosing. How many, did you overdose more than once? Or
I'm sure I did. And actually that alcohol, that car wreck that I found myself in the hospital with, essentially that's an overdose. Alcohol is nothing but a heavy sedative narcotic. We pretend it's different. We had a prohibition against it. It didn't work. And so it's alcohol is something that's socially acceptable. But in reality, there's nobody or nothing that has ever done a whole lot of good for her, except for, those people who really can. There are people who will have a beer today and not touch it again for another 6 months or whatever. They use it as a social lubricant to sit and talk with people for a little bit. But, if you start getting imbibed, if you start approaching 0.8, 0.08, whatever it is, and haven't got enough inside of you that says stop, then you probably have a problem. And when I used to, when I first got clean, I didn't do anything really productive. I was actually working in the same men's clothing store that I was heading to the day that I did that car wreck. That was my last run. But later on, I started getting to the amends process, and there was a whole lot of things that I did to support my habit that are socially unacceptable. And I don't go into them a whole lot. I don't want them to sound glorious. was a dope fiend supporting $1,000 a day habit. And that's, in order to do something like that, you have to be able to do anything. And I mean, without doubt, anything, and things that I think are totally unconscionable. Like I said, when I first got clean, one of the things that they were talking about was God. And I didn't want anything to do with God because I knew I was unredeemable. I was just hoping that I could make amends to society when I got clean. That was all I was hoping for. And when I got to that ninth step, I mentioned to my sponsor that I had done random acts of violence just to vent sometimes. And I didn't even know who they were against, much less where to make amends to. And his response was, "You used to be a public menace. Maybe you should do some public service." And I just kind of nodded my head. I dropped out of school in my sophomore year of high school. So I'm not, I got a great vocabulary because my brother made me read a dictionary, but I really didn't finish a lot of school at that point, you know. And so I had no idea what he was even talking about because I'd been unplugged from society since I was a kid. And I just nodded my head, and he says, "You go home and think about if you can find something. And if you don't have a clue by next Friday, I'll have something for you." And when I came back, I didn't even bother, to think about it. I just waited for him to find something for me. He put me in touch with the Monterey County AIDS Project in California, basically helping. AIDS was a death sentence back in those days. And everybody thought that if you were even in the same room with somebody with AIDS, that you would probably catch it and die. And so people abandoned these people as soon as they were diagnosed. And basically, I was educated in how to help these people with light housekeeping, maybe doing some grocery shopping, but essentially becoming their friend right up until the day they died.
Mm.
And sometimes I was the only friend, the only family they had at that point. And it's an ugly, ugly disease. The only thing that even compares to it, as near as I can tell, is cancer. And there's a lot of forms of cancer that look a whole lot like it. And a lot of time, AIDS itself doesn't normally kill people. It's usually the stuff that their immune system can't fight off. And so
Yeah.
I did that with about 4 or 5 guys, maybe 6 guys.
They all passed away?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Single one of them. And it took a toll on me, and it also opened up another can of worms. And that was a lot of the people I'd bashed out against were gays, because when I was young and I didn't have a license in the beginning and I was running all this trip that I was doing, I actually would hitchhike all over the place. And a couple of times I got picked up by pedophiles, and I mistakenly thought gays were pedophiles. Now, I have no really interest in either one of those lifestyles, but I do understand now that it's a different thing. Pedophilia and gays are a totally different animal.
Sure.
But back then I saw them as the same thing until I ended up working in that Monterey County AIDS Project. And that's when it started dawning on me that, there's a difference between these guys and the guys that were picking me up out on the street.
So that gave you a lot of empathy?
It gave me some.
Yeah.
It gave me a lot more. Well, by the end, I was just getting ripped apart inside because, basically, like I said, I was becoming one of these guys' best friends. And so it was ripping me up, just helping people die. And I imagine people in hospice have ways of dealing with it better if they work there long term. I know that nothing that I've done in the last 30 some years, I've worked nonprofits in drug rehabilitation, in child protective services, shelters. I mean, I somehow or miraculously never picked up an actual felony. That's not to say that I didn't do horrible, evil things, but I never actually picked up a felony. And so therefore, a lot of my past society doesn't look at, but I do, and so I've utilized it as best I can to try and help other people. And that's been my life for the last 36 years. And somewhere along the line, I got religion. A bunch of guys from a Presbyterian church in Florida got a hold of me, and they basically taught me that if God wasn't on my side, how did I survive 7 total car wrecks, 4 motorcycle bike wrecks? I've been shot at. I've had part of my ear nicked off enough that I bled, but it didn't leave any kind of real scar tissue. I had a guy with a kitchen knife about this long come up and stick me right here in the gut. and the blade broke and dropped around my feet, and that's like miraculous. And they pointed out, if God wasn't on your side, how did you survive this stuff?
It's those abs of steel.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
And I have no idea where that came from or what that was about, but I knew the guy. I knew I'd ticked him off. I knew that he was terrified of me and probably was trying to do a preemptive thing, thinking that I was coming after him, but I didn't really think that hard about him. So he kind of surprised me walking up.
Wow.
But I've had an interesting, bout with this idea of, well, what would make God want to keep me around, and essentially my life has been centered around helping addicts and people who are unlovable find their way back into society and realize that, I put a plaque over my desk when I was working, and it said, people need loving the most when they deserve it the least. And I've tried to look at people that way for most of my last 30 some odd years,
That makes sense. And I know I've witnessed people, I try to hold judgment on people because I imagine when you were young doing those random acts of violence you were talking about, did you feel inside like this isn't me? Or was the addiction kind of controlling your thoughts too?
As long as I was loaded, I didn't really have a conscience, but my life lived kind of like a cycle back then, where I would run until basically I passed out. I would kind of come to, and before I even opened my eyes, I knew two things. I knew I didn't have any money. I didn't have any dope. And so before my eyes opened and I rose from the bed and put my feet into the shoes, I was already thinking of scams that I could do to go out and get me what I needed to do to get started again. And sometimes that would be as simple as like walking up to McDonald's and getting them distracted as they open the till and reach in and try and grab some of their stuff. Something that always bugged me for a long time is I used to scare the crap out of little old ladies at the ATM machine, stepping out of the bushes as they were pulling $100 or $200 out of the bank, and they probably couldn't afford it. Probably the weakest of, so, and a lot of times I was like looking for ways and means to hurt and steal from my own people, the other addicts and salespeople out there on the street. So, we kind of knick-knacked each other in a lot of ways. Sometimes we'd team up on things and then we would rip each other off anyway. And it was it's a nasty, nasty world.
Yeah. It can be beautiful, but yes.
It did become, it has weighed on my conscience. I still have dreams about some of the issues that happened. One of the worst nightmares I have is when I was like 13, 14, 15 years old. I was sitting in a cafe in downtown Salinas, California. It used to be like $1.25. You could get 3 eggs and bacon and hash browns and toast. And, for like $1.25, you couldn't really beat it. And I was sitting there one day coming down off of about 3 days on LSD. And, so the room was still kind of floating around and stuff, but I knew I needed to eat something because my stomach was tore up from the last several days. And so I was sitting there trying to eat this thing. And I remember I was all of a sudden looked down in my plate and I noticed I used to eat my eggs sunny side up. And I noticed a heartbeat going on in the yellow part of the egg. And I'm like, good Lord, that chicken's not dead yet. That baby's not dead yet. And I was just like contemplating that. And I felt this ice cold feel. And this guy walked into the restaurant, and I was almost in the back, but not quite, staring at the door in one of those booths. And he comes up, steps right next to my chair, and blew the guy behind me away. And I remember everything inside of me screaming, "Don't look, don't look!" But I couldn't help but look up, where this gunshot had just been fired right next to my head. And the guy like got done looking at what he was done, and he looked over at me, and I'm staring at him, and our eyes locked, and I'm like, "You're dead. He's got no choice. You're witness, And
you're on LSD,
and
right?
I'm coming off of LSD. I'm still halfway on, halfway off, and I just like didn't have a clue what to do with that, and so I just kind of smiled at the guy. And I guess he saw that my pupils were about that big around or something. I mean, I don't know. He just like shook his head and turned around and walked back out and left me sitting there. I threw some money on the table and just walked out the door. And on the way out the door, I kept on thinking, don't look back. But I couldn't stop myself from looking back and seeing this guy's brain matter all across the back wall and his hole in his head. And I've never forgotten that, And,
no doubt. My goodness.
Because that was the first person I ever saw in that situation. But I've seen too many things. And so my therapist used to say that I had PTSD and I went through a lot of treatment with, I didn't find that out until I was working in treatment. And I came to the realization, a lot of people work in treatment. They think, well, I've been in treatment all day. I don't need any meetings. And so they stop going to meetings. They end up getting loaded down the line. But with me, I figured when I was working in treatment, I was collecting so much crap off of people.
Sure.
That I not only needed more meetings,
we carry it with you.
But I also found a therapist that would work with me on the wages that I was working at. And she was the one who started me on PTSD treatment and working some of those issues out. And, but I still get haunted. I still watch them going on,
Yeah.
It's a violent world, a lot of ways out there.
Yeah.
And especially if you're living in the mix, because if you ever have anything, you become a target instead of being the hunter, you become the hunted. If anybody ever finds out what you've got, so.
Was there ever any time period in your life where you found yourself without a home or anything or were you like, you said $1,000 a day was your habit? I'm just curious. I mean, that's $365,000 a year. How to,
it's far more money than I've ever made legally in my life.
Yeah. That's wow.
I found myself homeless a couple of times, and I've also found myself homeless clean, because life doesn't necessarily always get all magically better, once you're clean. My first wife and I broke up literally after I was 2 years clean. She'd been waiting 20 years for me to sober up, and I didn't grow up to be who she wanted me to be, especially not in 2 years. I mean, I had a lot of damage, and I was not. I wasn't the ideal husband anymore still. And so we broke up. I mean, my first divorce ever was at 2 years clean. And the men in the program wrapped around me and walked me through that to teach me that I didn't have to get loaded over that pain. You're going to hurt, but I don't have to get loaded over it.
That was the beginning of your 36 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
That was at 2 years clean. The woman I'm married to now actually introduced me to my second wife, a crazy Jamaican woman in Oakland, California. And I moved to Oakland and worked for Haight-Ashbury Free Clinics. That's when I really started working in drug treatment, was at a residential treatment in San Francisco in the Tenderloin District, which is like where the dregs of the whole Bay Area end up in the Tenderloin District. And I married this poor Jamaican woman who, I did not realize that when I was introduced to her that she was my present wife's party partner when they were out there socially using. And she still wanted to get loaded, and I don't make it that comfortable in my own house for people who want to get loaded. And so she was trying to toe the line and be something, but and again, that was way too quick after my first wife. And so it just all blew up. I mean, it took me a long time to stabilize and become something that was, on the work side of me, I could work and do a lot of jobs and be pretty stable. But in a personal life, I was nuts.
Yeah.
And I didn't function well. The only people that I treated probably with any fairness or equity was probably my family, brothers, sisters, and even them. I lived in the Bay Area. The closest person living to me was my daughter. My brother lived in Sacramento, about 2 hours over from the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of my family lived either in Missouri or Seattle. So
was y'all close growing up?
When I was growing up, we moved every 2 to 3 years. So the only people I really knew was my family, siblings, especially. My oldest brother, Mike, was my best friend probably ever. Until after I got clean, and I've been around for a long time now, but all my siblings except for my baby sister are dead.
Oh.
My parents, when I was 17 years clean, my mom died. That was a little while back. Right behind that, a couple of years was my dad. A couple of years after that was both my brothers, 5 weeks apart. And then I think I was just celebrating 22 years when my oldest sister, I knew something was wrong with her. So I was flying out to Seattle to go see what was really up and to talk to her about if she was ready to pass, because by then I'd been saved and I was hoping that she was too. Like I said, I came from a pastor family and I didn't know how far the rest of the family had rebelled. So I was going out to actually ask her that question and to see what was going on, because she was bald headed and she had some kind of cancer going on and she wouldn't talk to us about it. And I'm living 3,000 miles, 3,500 miles away. And so the morning that the night that I was going, before I was going to get on a plane in the morning, I got a phone call that she had passed from my niece out in Seattle. And I went ahead and went out there and helped them to put together her affairs and whatnot. And, kind of got haunted there because I didn't move quick enough, because I knew she was sick, but I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
But, so I got a baby sister, and for some reason we weren't really, really close growing up. And for some reason now, because I'm the only one left, I don't know exactly if that's what that is, but she's coming to my house every Christmas. And sometimes she came out on spring break. She drives school bus for school district in Missouri. And when she gets vacations and stuff, she'll drop in. And
she'll come in West Virginia?
Yeah.
How cool.
And when I'm traveling, like I got friends across the country. So when I'm traveling, I will stop in. Even if I got to go 100 miles out of the way, I'll go stop in and stay with her for a night. She doesn't really have room to put me up for a long period of time, but she'll do anything for you. So she'll give me her bed and stay in her daughter's room or out on the couch or whatever. And she treats us like gold,
That's great.
I try to reciprocate, and we're developing a relationship, but it's funny because we didn't really have much of anything for a long, long time. We used to live in the same town and she wouldn't come to my house.
Mm-hmm.
Never got a call from her, nothing. And, of course, in all reality, I didn't really go out of my way to go see her either or call her up. We were raised in the same house, but my best friend was my brother, not my sister. So
sure. Sorry, Dana. Scoot that a little closer to your mouth, just a little bit. You can swing it; it'll move.
Am I sliding backwards?
Oh, you're good. No, you're relaxed. It's perfect. So, when you have experienced loss like that, was that the toughest time of your recovery, or did you find yourself having a certain process each time that began to happen?
Grief is a hard process for almost anybody, and in recovery, it's not any better, I'm sure. But by the time my brothers and my older sister were dying, I had finally, like I said, I ran into a bunch of guys in Florida from a Presbyterian church. It's a Bible study that I'm still involved with. 4 guys, we all meet on Tuesday mornings and study the Word, but and pray together. And so I have developed a faith, and that really helped me through a lot of this. The interesting thing is one of the hardest times of my life was when I almost blew up my present marriage. And that's what really got me to step into a church for the first time in 50 years without actually just being there for a wedding or a funeral. And I went there partially because in the back of my head, I thought if nothing else, I could at least get some marriage counseling for free out of this. Right. And so I went to the church with my wife. She actually called me up and told me I should wait an extra week because he was going to do a sermon on tithing, which is about money.
Mm-hmm.
And
10%, right?
Yeah. And I just kind of giggled about that because I figured if he couldn't get me on tithing, he wasn't going to get me anyway. Because frankly, as being a preacher's kid, it occurred to me that if church members would tithe more regularly, we might not have lived in a poverty situation where both my mom and my dad had to work, and I was getting raised essentially by my 2 older brothers and sister. So I didn't really have an issue with tithing as much as a lot of people might think, or a lot of other people might, but I just kind of look at it as a way of supporting something that actually gets you through. And so,
correct me if I'm wrong. Does it mean your time too? Like your time dedicated to the church? I'm not sure if I've always been curious if it's strictly monetary or if it's,
in scripture, basically the way it's laid out, it's monetary, or the first fruits of your garden, or your first fruits of your cows or sheep, or whatever is your way of living. It's a way of supporting well, in the beginning it was the Levites. They were not allowed any property when they took Israel or Canaan away from all the heathen, supposedly. It was a way of keeping those people supported, because they weren't given actual jobs. They weren't given any extra flocks or anything. They didn't get any part of the inheritance. They were just supposed to become the priests of the nation.
Gotcha.
And so they needed somebody to take care of them, because their full-time job was taking care of that.
Sure.
And so that was essentially what it started out as. But actually, even before that, I guess Abraham, or Abram, he was called at that time, when he left essentially Mesopotamia, or Babylon, whatever, and moved out. And while he was out and about, the one bunch of kings decided to attack another bunch of kings, and his nephew Lot got caught up in the mix and got captured and was being taken away by the winning group. And Abram heard about it, and he grabbed all of his men and ran over and battled and got all the stuff back. And on the way back, he didn't accept any profit out of the deal. All he wanted was his nephew back in his family. And he did give 10% of everything that he had acquired out of this battle to this one guy named Melchizedek, who was a priest. And it's funny, that's the only time he's mentioned basically in the Old Testament. He's also mentioned in the New Testament as basically that's what Jesus Christ was coming back as Melchizedek, a priesthood in the order of Melchizedek, which wasn't Levites. There was no Levites. Well, there was not Levites back then when it all started, but
yeah.
So it's got a lot of history. I'm really bad about describing it.
No, that's great. Well, and your negative connotation towards it was you felt like it made you all struggle.
It definitely
grew up.
A struggle. Yeah.
Yeah. So you go in, they're talking about tithing, and what happens?
Well, it's interesting because when he was preaching, every time he talked about tithing, whereas God gives us everything that we have. And so tithing is not really giving anything away. It's just handing back, 10% of what we've been given. And to deny that is basically our greed. And every time he was talking about that greed, he was hitting me right in the middle of the chest, because I was separated from my wife at that time. And in all honesty, the reason I was separated from her, it was before church and all this stuff, was I'd been working a fairly decent program about staying clean, and I was becoming fairly socially acceptable by society standards, but I still had a lot of gaps in my recovery that weren't taking care of my personal life at home. And things started falling apart, and rather than work on them or figure out what was wrong or getting help for the marriage, I ended up stepping out on my wife. And I'm not a very good hider of those sorts of things. And we blew apart for almost a year and a half. And but we'd been best friends for like a decade before we got married, and we'd been married for 10 years, and neither of us wanted to let that go. And so that friendship, that bond of friendship, forced us into looking at each other. And also we were raising 2 grandkids because of my stepdaughter in Greenbrier County who's busy being a dope fiend.
Right.
I needed to do something. There was obviously something missing, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And so I came and brought Christmas presents to a whole family and to the kids and her, and said, I'm going to go see my kid. We were living in Florida. So I ran off to California to go hang out with my daughter. And everybody there got the flu. And it just kept bouncing between the 2 kids and my daughter and her husband. And so I had a lot of time just babysitting them, scrubbing walls to get the germs away from, because kids are lean on the walls and stuff. And, basically nursing and thinking a lot of time on my own, just thinking. And I kept on looking for what could possibly be missing. And the little voice of my mom comes back in her deathbed. She was saying, you really need a church. I said, Mom, if I have the faith of the average Christian, I probably would have been loaded by now. And she just kind of grinned at me and she says, well, I got a feeling it'll all work out. So you just keep going on the way you're going. It'll all work the way it's supposed to. And came back to that thought in my head of, maybe you do need a church. And then the little voice in the back of my head says, well, at least you could probably get some, marriage counseling out of the deal. So that's when I went back to Florida and I told her I was going to go to the church. And so when he started talking about my greed and all that avarice, and I started realizing he is right. I mean, marriages is not 50-50. It's 100%. Either I'm putting in 100% and she's putting in 100% or we're not. And in reality, I'm not trying to do it as much for her, although I love my wife incredibly. I think she's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But there was something missing, and the missing part was God. And if I start working my way toward God and she's working her way, that way we end up coming closer together the closer we come to God. And once I got saved and figured that part out and found that I might be redeemable too, I talked with the pastor and I told him, hey, I want to do this. And he sat down and prayed with me, or got on our knees and prayed together at Chili's in Palm Bay, Florida.
Yeah.
And then we proceeded to tell him I had to be all in or I couldn't do this. And so I've tried to be not just 10% of my wealth or whatever, but I also try to give them as much time as I can. God gave us a mission, and the mission he gave us was to go tell the world about him. And my part of that is the people I work with and the people I love most is addicts.
Yeah.
And people a lot like me, prostitutes, just people who are just the unlovable of our society. And the only way they're going to ever learn anything is if they get a model of somebody who's been there and got clean and shows them that there's a way out. And then after they're clean, they can start worrying about the next step, because that's what it was for me, is I had to take little steps. When we first come in, we don't feel like we're redeemable.
What is that? So I'll say, because we've had different life experiences, and when, like, I know the time range when I would judge people, and I'll look at people on the street and I'll just say, oh, they need to get a job or whatever. It's easy to be judgmental. How do you, what's the difference there in how you look at people like that, or someone who may be, panhandling or something like that? What's your outlook?
Panhandlers are not necessarily addicts. A lot of them make actually pretty decent living at it. But some addicts are out there doing that. And sometimes it's, there's a vet with no legs that I saw just yesterday. I don't care if he's using or not. He's obviously not going to go out and get a real job with his legs cut off above his knees. And so I'll stop and give him $5 every now and then. And also try to talk to him about, how's things going? What do you need besides money?
That's what I try to do. I'm like, obviously they're having a tough time. They're setting out here for hours every day. He's fell into this health situation. That's kind of the way I look at it. I don't know who the person is. I don't know anything about them. I just try to be empathetic towards their situation. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I do.
There's a guy down there by CVS on Bobby Bird downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Sitting out there, and he had a different sign that says, "Stop and pray with me." I couldn't help but notice that the first time I blew by him, but by the time I came back, he wasn't around. So I came back again. I kept looking for him. And I finally caught him. But just before I caught him, a few days before that, some deputy had stopped. And he had stopped and prayed with the guy, but it looked like it was a camera shooting a publicity thing, right? and trying to look good for people. I don't know. He even did an interview of some sort. I actually think that the fact that he stopped is better than most of them, right? Most people didn't even bother to stop or even call attention to it. And maybe he was trying to call attention to the guy more than himself. I don't know.
Well, using the media to inspire, I think it can inspire either negatively or positively, either way, more than the contrary. So maybe that's kind of.
I stopped and made intentionally sure that I caught him in a spot where there wasn't anybody who's going to see what we're doing.
Sure.
The scripture tells me when I'm praying, I'm not supposed to be out there trying to show off to other people. It's something between me and God. And if I'm praying with somebody, for somebody, I figure it's between me and them and me and God, and so I got his name. I actually knew his name. That's something I didn't even hear in that interview. And Mark was looking just literally for somebody to pray with. He wasn't asking me for anything except for to spend time with him, just to pray and to show that somebody cared.
Wow.
And, I don't know if Mark's addicted or not. He didn't look it. He does have health issues, but he needed loving. He needed somebody to care for him, and he didn't know how to get it except for that. So he did it, with this little sign. And, I appreciate that. I try to look at people differently than most people in society because I have been out there. I have been sitting out in the cold and trying to support a habit. I look at them there, but for the grace of God, I am. And a lot of them don't want to hear it in the beginning, but when they do start figuring out, why do you keep checking on me? Why do you care? Then I can start sharing with them. Well, I used to be here once upon a time, and I ain't here to preach to you. I'm just trying to attend to your needs and see if there's something more than just money or food or whatever, but let you know that there's a way out and there's a different way of life. And some of us have found it, and it's not a short-term deal. A lot of people go into recovery. I used to go to a meeting in Sacramento where it was cool to go into recovery, and then they get loaded, go into recovery because somehow or another that was cool because they thought that was like some kind of Hollywood brand, because a lot of actors started coming into recovery when they start getting in trouble with the whatever. And so they'd go into treatment, and then all of a sudden they'd be all better and talk about it. And then all of a sudden they go get loaded again.
Sure.
I'm an example that it can work for a lifetime. I'm almost 70 years old, but I ain't quite. And yet I've been clean 36 years. That's over half my life that's been given to this sort of work. And, I don't look at it as something I'm supposed to be proud of. I look at it as something that's necessary for our society. And I just want to fill a niche for our society is all it is. My hesitation coming onto here was I didn't want to be some kind of fan-based, thing. I truly believe in what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And like I mentioned, we didn't know each other, and it's kind of, there's a trust too. You never know when people bring out cameras, and you never know what their motives are. Yeah. So I appreciate you opening up about.
I liked your discussion with the coal miner.
Yeah.
Never knew a coal miner till I moved here. But I go to church with a whole bunch of coal miners, and I got a really big church. So there's a whole lot of different flavors of people, but good Lord, you can't live anywhere in Beckley and you not know a zillion coal miners, retired coal miners, present coal miners. My daughter's living with a guy who wants to be a coal miner, but he's busy being a Ford mechanic.
Yep.
And every time he thinks about going into the mines, they offer him another school so that he can get more money.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, smart man.
But,
yeah. Well, and I think I told you, which that was my father-in-law, and I was a coal miner for 9 years, surface miner. So it's a different life.
Yeah.
But some of the best people on earth, no doubt.
And I got blessed. A few years back, my wife and I decided to be tourists. And so we went to the coal mine exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
And a guy named Don took us underground. Don is sheer show, man. I mean, they've got a steady bunch of stops that they're all supposed to make. And they always will talk about what's going on at the stop. But then they'll share their own experience. Well, Don is just show business, man. Don's a trip. he'll start singing to you before you go into the hole. And by the time they come out around the other end of it, they're coming across, heading back into this, the whole train singing with I owe my soul to Dawn's just a trip, right? So that was my first experience going into the mines, and then any kind of a mine. Well, I've been in silver mines and other things, just as a tourist.
Right.
But then I went up and did the history thing above with the coal mine town and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of fell in love with it, except for there's a little graffiti over by the church organ. And there was somebody snapped a desk in the schoolhouse on the other end, and there was nobody babysitting those two buildings. And it kind of ticked me off that people would treat things that way. So on the way out, I was talking to my wife. I says, I kind of wonder why nobody's babysitting the school or the church or whatever. And the lady pops up behind us, overheard, and she says, I can't find nobody who wants to work. That's why there's nobody up there. To which my wife responds, well, I can't find anybody to look at my resume past the PhD at the bottom and give me a job. I've been looking for a part-time job for 2+ years in this town. They won't even give me. Next thing I know, she's talking about him with a job over there and blah, blah, blah. It's a seasonal job, whatever. And all of a sudden my wife rears up and says, you want to hire that guy. That's the history guy. Don't know anything about West Virginia history at that point, man. But this is one of the most fascinating places I have ever lived in my life.
Right.
And the bottom line about it is it's the coal miners who built this. Coal miners, steel workers, cowboys, not cattle barons, not coal barons, but it's the working class that put this place together.
Heck yeah.
And I just fell in love with these people,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't get into the issue of clean coal, dirty coal, any other coal. I just get into the issue of I love these people, and these are the people, they're the backbone of society. And it kills me because that's our children out there.
Yep.
All the drug addiction and everything, that's our kids. Those are West Virginia kids.
Yep.
And
yep. And a lot of them, you can tell they were told so long that they weren't worth it, that they started to believe it, know?
Yep.
And it's like, it's just sad to think about.
So that's kind of an insight of who I am and what my life is about. I work with people because I love people.
Yeah.
And that's what I continue to do. I'm retired. I do the coal mine thing. I also have Santa Claus during Christmas time.
Yeah, you make a good one. Yeah.
I'll show you pictures. But and I do that because I liked Santa Ernie down at the mall.
Mm-hmm.
They had a really good Santa this year, but he's like $35 to $70 or something for pictures, man. It's crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of people can't afford that. The economic times are not really all that great all the time. And every family's, there's always going to be some families who can't.
Sure.
I make sure that wherever I'm at, I get free pictures for the kids. Right. And so
that's beautiful. At the Exhibition Coal Mine, you've done Santa
I start
Claus?
there, say Exhibition Coal Line. I did a church out in the middle of nowhere in West County off of 3. Some other Santa got hired to go hand out angel tree gifts, and he blew them off because they were too far off the grid. And he says, I can't go out there. So
yeah,
I went out and found them. And I also got one that paid me $300 out of the blue. I was like,
Sure.
I spent 3 hours with them. They fed me a good meal at the Black Knight Country Club.
Beautiful place.
And then handed me a Christmas card, really nice Christmas card with a check. And I'm like, good Lord, is this real?
How nice.
I don't ever talk to people about money.
Yeah.
The only people I've ever mentioned money to is the school district. I made it really clear that I will do anything for the school district. I started doing with kindergartners, first graders, and special ed kids and second graders. And schools, my tax dollars already pays the schools. I don't need to get some of it back.
Sure.
So I made it clear I was working with the school board at the coal mine exhibition and told them that I would do any school for free. All they had to do was just call and ask and schedule it, And I've done churches. I've done all kinds of places. I go to the places where nobody wants to go. There's once or twice I'll even pop up at the mall, and if I can find a chair, I'll sit around and in discreet places like Carhartt sections or places where nobody ever goes,
You got your own outfit and everything?
Oh, yeah.
Load up?
I bought my first one in Texas. I bought my next one here, and I'm looking at another one now.
Awesome. You comfortable? I got several more questions. I'm just loving this.
I'm pretty comfortable at this point.
Sure.
I need to get a drink again of water.
Yeah. So on the religion aspect, you was talking about getting saved. I'm just curious, was there a moment where I kind of liken it to like a clicking a light switch? Was there a moment where it just came over you of like comfort, or what does that necessarily feel like? When you realize that you found religion.
I didn't really find God. He kind of found me. He kind of forced me into a box where, he like rodeoed me into a corner where I had nowhere else to go. And I finally looked up and saw the grace that was being offered to me. And even then I didn't feel worthy of it. I've been clean for 20 years plus. Did not feel like I was still worthy of going to a church for anything, honestly, I don't know if any of it has slipped through because I haven't really paid attention, but I was profane. A lot of people in meetings are that way. I had an F word a lot pop up every now and then. I spoke at a convention. First time I ever spoke at a convention with 1,000 people and up in Ripley. And I'd successfully avoided it for 30 some odd years. And my best friends in Lewisburg, Cooper says, it's about time you stepped up, man. So blah, blah. So he set me up to do this thing. So I did my pitch, about my recovery. And it was interesting because the one thing that's really been clear to me was in the beginning, I was bucking the idea. I got clean. They read it. They do a lot of readings in the beginnings of the meetings. They always say, in one of the readings that happens, no matter what 12-step group you go to, they always have this one little section in one of the readings that says, we have no initiation fees or dues, no pledges to sign, no promises to make, and it continues on. And one day when I was in early recovery, I was trying to still figure this out because I knew those hokey steps weren't going to work and I didn't understand the point. But I still saw a whole lot of people that were clean. And so I listened to that and I caught that. And they continued on with the reading. And I thought, they have no initiation fees or dues, but it didn't say they don't have an initiation. And so I started doing the stuff they said because it occurred to me that the hokey steps were an initiation. Now, that was my dope fiend behavior that got me started. I had to fool myself into doing what they told me to do. And I started doing their hokey steps and reading their book. And one of the back of the book of the Alcoholics Anonymous, where I actually got clean, there's a little line in there from William James and back there about on spiritual awakenings. And it talks about for some people, they have these lightning bolts and clouds and, and everything bliss, and they're caught in the big light and the wind blows up their butt, And he says, but for most of us, the belief in God and that spiritual awakening, that contact with God is slow and educational. And for me, it was really slow and educational. But somewhere at about 5 years clean, it dawned on me that I sort of believed that there was a power greater than myself. And it wasn't the old man on the throne that my dad had preached to me about. And I was able to stop waiting for the lightning bolt, and they talk about a God as you understand him. And I didn't quite understand that. I thought there was only one God, and I still think there's only one God, but I continued on with that lightning bolt aspect not being there anymore. So I started exploring a little bit more, working a little bit deeper, and gradually over a period of time, when I walked into that church, it dawned on me that I believed in only one God. And the one God that I was raised with basically is what it was. And so I still questioned whether or not I was redeemable, but I was willing to explore it because I certainly thought that I needed what they had to offer. And it wasn't just marriage counseling. And the funny part about the marriage counseling is they gave us, I get a chance to see them this next week, part of the trip to Florida.
Oh, cool.
They gave us this, they had a shepherding program. Shepherding is basically they will assign an elder in the church and his wife to walk with us through some of our marital issues and help us to learn how to be better. And so they gave us this group, a couple of people named Ken and Kathy, K and K, right? And we went over there expecting them to like tell us what you need to do with her, what you need to do, what she needs to do, blah blah blah. They didn't do that. They took us into the book of Ephesians, and it says, husbands, love your wives. And for wives, it says, respect your husbands. We're different. We're equal, but we're different. And we both have a niche to play. And men have this attitude thing where if we feel disrespected, we become agitated and we're not very loving people. And never once did he tell me what I needed to do for her or anything. He wanted me to work on Dana. And then one day we're still doing this for a long time. And all of a sudden my wife comes up to me and starts talking to me about, I'm sorry for these things, that I did, blah, and I was disrespectful. And I'm like, I was the one who went out on her. None of this has anything to do with you. You're bliss. I mean, you're good. But they did it to both of us. They started us both working along a path that, and it comes back to that triangle. There's a base of the triangle is the marriage, and we start sliding toward God. And the closer we come towards God at the peak of the triangle, the closer we're getting to each other at the same time. Mm-hmm. And, when I prayed with the pastor, I felt better, but I still felt unworthy. And between that and scripture studying, I studied the books that Paul wrote, about 2/3 of the New Testament. Mm-hmm. Paul was a guy named Saul who actually was out persecuting Christians when God knocked him off his ass, blinded him on the road to Damascus, and told him, stop messing with me and go see this guy if you ever want to see again, and he'll fix you up and you're going to go carry the message to the Gentiles, us. And Paul killed Stephen. He literally was instrumental in the stoning of the first of the martyrs of the Christian faith. If he's redeemable, why wouldn't I be?
Yeah.
And that's what it really boiled down to, is it was like water on stone, but eventually I cracked and realized if he's redeemable, why wouldn't I be?
Sure.
And then I looked at the rest of them, and the rest of them were no real, great characters. We had a couple of 3 or 4 fishermen, fishermen, pretty rough people for the most part. I don't know if you've ever lived on the coast, but I've lived along the coast about half my life, and there are some strange people. Fishermen, they're a lot like coal miners, but coal miners, at least being underground, believe in God for some reason. Fishermen, they believe in God because they have the storms and stuff, but they still, they're still rough characters.
Sure.
And so I don't know. It became real obvious to me that God could use anybody, and that meant even me. And then they started talking about their ministry. We did a discipleship thing for about 3 years, studying and trying to learn to be better disciples. And then we were talking about our ministry and where do we get discipleship to, where would we take this knowledge, and everybody's looking for, I don't know how to da. And I'm like, I don't know where to start, man. I'm really new at it. And they looked at me like I was stuck on stupid. It's like, you've already got a ministry, man. You work with addicts. You've already got people you built in that you.
That's my thing. It's like, if Jesus was around, he'd be the first one out there on the street talking, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that's kind of what turns people away from church sometimes, because it becomes tribal. Uh-huh. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And then it seems like the message gets lost maybe. But for AA, for instance, how heavy is religion a part of this program? Like, how would you describe AA for someone who doesn't know, that may need help?
There's a whole faction of judges and weird people who are thinking that AA is really, really religious. If that was the case, I don't think I would have ever made it. They did talk about God, but they also call it God as you understand him. There's a whole lot of people who come in and they say, well, if it's God as I understand him, I'm going to say it's the doorknob, because the doorknob is what I have to turn to get out of here. And if I put the doorknob in charge, then I won't go out of here. I tell it I don't want to go out of here when I'm going to get loaded. And so the doorknob will stop me. I don't know if it ever does, but at least it's a start. Mine was Bobby, a guy named Bobby J. Bobby was the guy who broke it down to me in a way that I could understand it. He asked me, what is powerlessness? And that was the first step, was you had to understand what powerlessness and unmanageability was. And I thought it was some kind of psychobabble test. And so, I'd written out all this stuff that I'd written out of the books and tried to psychobabble my way through it, but he didn't want to read what I wrote. He asked me, what is powerlessness? And I told him, try to give him like the same crap I'd heard in groups and treatment and blah, 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 and in AA meetings and other meetings, and he wouldn't settle for that. He kept on looking for me. What's powerlessness to you? What does it mean to you? And he told me a couple of stories out of his own experience, and all of a sudden it hit me that powerlessness was the guy who left his house one morning to go to work. And to this day, can't tell you if he even got there or not. He just found himself 10, 11 days later, banging on a pipe, doing the same thing he's always done. And I had no intentions of getting loaded. There wasn't anything good going on. There wasn't anything bad going on. I just was on my way to go to work.
Yeah.
And that makes your life really unmanageable. And so he says, well, why do you keep coming to these meetings? I didn't cop to it, but I'd watched him come in 5 years earlier. He was the angriest guy I'd ever seen in my life. That's why I knew I could relate to him. That's why I got him as a sponsor. I thought he might be cool enough to accept somebody like me. So he says, why do you keep coming to these meetings? I've seen you come around these meetings for years. I tell that you've been around for like 15 years already. And I looked at him and I was embarrassed, but I says, ever since the very first meeting, there are some of those people who've been sitting there in those rooms since that very first meeting I ever went to, who have this insatiable desire to not get loaded. And they seem to be having a whole lot better lives than me, even if their life doesn't necessarily look attractive to me. It's better than what I got. And I need that. And he said, congratulations, you just did the first 2 steps. Mm-hmm. I was like, I'd written 62 pages in this binder about the first step or 2. I had no idea that it was that simple. And that's who walked me through it. In the beginning, that was my higher power, was Bobby. I could call Bobby when the crap hit.
Was he your sponsor?
Yeah. And he could help me make life sense out of life. And then he made me get a whole bunch of other people's phone numbers, including his sponsor. And when he wasn't available, I still had other numbers to call. And one of those numbers, interestingly enough, is the woman I'm married to now. She came around 30 some years ago when I first got clean, and she married a friend of mine named Stuart and drug him back here. And Stuart drowned in the Greenbrier River about 95, 96.
Was he rafting?
But he was borrowed my brother-in-law's canoe, and apparently he was going down the river on flood stage, had 2 of the kids, his stepkids, in the boat with him. Oh. And he made them wear their little life vests because, they were kids, but Stuart was a manly man. His was tucked neitly under the...
Always wear that vest. Goodness.
And apparently he hit a rock or something, and he flipped it. The kids floated to the shore, but
So they survived?
It took him 5 or 6 days to be found down the road.
Oh.
And,
sorry to hear that.
But anyway... when she was out in California in early recovery, she was part of my sponsorship family. Her husband was sponsor of my same sponsor. Mm-hmm. And, so we were pretty good friends, and she was part of the family, and one day I came home from work, and I think I was like about 1.5 2 years clean. And, I was done. I was angry. I was ready to go out the door. I was going to get loaded. And I walked into my room. I was already not living with my first wife. So I went into a corner, and I slid into the corner of my room and just kind of was sitting there in a fetal position, rocking back and forth. And I knew if I went out that door again, I was going to get loaded. And the little voice in my head, the dope fiend, was dancing in my head, and because it knew it had me. And it says, you see, what did those people tell you that you were supposed to do when you felt like this? And I said, it said that I was supposed to pick up the phone and call somebody. And he says, well, there's the phone right above you on the desk there. And there's no cell phones back in those days, right? So I reach up, pull the little cordless phone down here, pull out my little phone book, and start calling everybody I know. And I kept on, I'd get voice machines, answering machines with tape, the old school things, right? And I can't talk to a machine when I'm crazy. I needed somebody live. And so I called everybody, and the last number is ringing and ringing and ringing. And this dope fiend's dancing on my grave in my head. He says, you see, you did what they told you and it didn't work. What are you going to do now? And I was like baffled. And then all of a sudden a little thing in the back of my head says, well, you better get on your knees and pray. And I was like, oh man, the God thing. And then all of a sudden a line out of the AA 12 and 12 7th step, it says, many of us call upon God as some sort of bush league pinch hitter to be called upon when all else fails. And I was like, man, I don't want to use God as some kind of bush league pinch hitter, you know? And a little voice in the back of my head says, you ain't got a lot of choice. So I went over to the bed and I crawled up there and I said, God, you got to help me, man. I can't do this. And I don't know what happened. I don't know if I was like 5 minutes there or half an hour there, but all of a sudden the phone rang. And I pick it up. And here's this party going on the other end of the phone. And it was Nancy, my wife. And she says, where are you at? Well, obviously I'm at home because we don't have cell phones. So
Right.
And she says, well, why aren't you over here at the club? We're all here, blah, blah, blah. It's New Year's Eve. I forgot they were all in a big dance thing going on. They were having a party. And I'm 6 blocks away dying, calling everybody who's at the party.
Sure.
And she just had an uncanny knack of catching those times when I'm lost and calling me.
Oh,
And then she married Stuart, and then she moved off to West Virginia. And, you know, life went on for a while. We stayed in touch, but she was kind of lost to the family because she's real family-oriented West Virginian.
yeah.
Right. I'd say, how you doing? She, well, Stuart's having trouble with the job, blah, blah, blah. Well, that sucks. How are you doing? Well, you know, blah, blah, blah. Justin's not getting, you know, blah, blah. And that's too bad. So how about you? Well, you know, Robbie, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, she didn't exist. It's just all about family, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, when we got married, that was one of the things I wanted her to be, You know, I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about her and me. And we both are separate, but we're equal people. And she's gone from, she's got her own story, but she ran away from home when she was 16 years old. She didn't run away from home. They were at an amusement park in Orlando. And she walked out of the amusement park and hitchhiked to California, leaving her parents wondering what happened to her in the amusement park.
Wow.
And so that's the beginning of her story. So obviously she's a high school dropout as well. She's now teaching at 2 colleges. She's a biology teacher.
Did I hear PhD?
PhD.
Man, good for her.
she's light years ahead. She's the epitome of what can be done in this program, you know.
Heck yeah.
And, I even went to Concord in the social work department and pulled myself. I ain't got any masters or PhDs, but you know, at least I got educated. I was trying to catch up with. I've been working with addicts for a long, long time, but the degrees are taking over to such a point that the paperwork's getting phenomenal. I mean, it's getting huge. But not only that, but if you got a degree, they would be making 30 to 40% more than I was for doing the same job that I've been doing for like 20 years.
Sure.
I figured I'd go to school and take a shot. And so I worked on that. And then I had a stroke in the middle of everything and things changed. So
Sure.
I retired, but I just can't walk away, you know?
Man, wow. So what are the 12? Can you lay out what the 12 steps are? I've always been curious.
Sure. Okay, well, I'm going to set up for a minute because I'm sliding.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
First step is you're admitting that you're powerless and unmanageable. The first step is we admitted that we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. And I kind of described that with my going out the door and every intention of going to work. And I was like probably only about 10 weeks clean at that point, but you know, at least I had some time and understood that I needed to get to work to keep the rent paid, blah, blah, blah. You know, I mean, I had some sense of responsibility and I wasn't really even having a bad day. I wasn't hurting or anything. And yet I got loaded. So I had to admit that it wasn't her that pissed me off or the boss who ticked me off that was getting this happening. It was something inside of me. I was powerless over my life, and and the addiction was making me unmanageable. And the second step is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. I didn't really grab a whole lot of that, but I did understand that I was crazy. The things I was doing was crazy. There's a description of us in the AA big book called the jaywalker, about a guy who, for some reason, wants to step out in front of in front of buses and stuff and see if they stop in time. And he's addicted to it. He keeps on stepping off in front of buses and stuff until one day he finally gets hit by one and it breaks his back. And he goes and gets well, and they tell him he can't do this anymore. But 6 weeks after he gets out of the hospital, he does it again, and it's like, isn't that a little bit crazy? And that's essentially what we're doing. We're buying, we're going out and risking our lives to get the money to buy a heart attack, to buy a drug overdose, to buy, the things we do to ourselves are just outrageous, and we work our asses off to do it. We prostitute ourselves. We beat ourselves into oblivion, man. And then the third step is we came to believe that we made a decision to turn our will into lives into the power of God as we understand them. And that one, basically, I thought that meant that I was supposed to just give it all to God and he'd take care of everything. God don't want everything. He wants us to, he gave us choice for a reason. But Bobby says it's like putting money in the bank. I didn't give the bank my money. I put my money in their care. They will help me if I'm willing to listen to them, guide me through where I actually maybe can put a little bit away and get somewhere in life. But, I can also go blow the whole thing like on another drug run or something. I could do, stupid stuff, but I got it in their care so that they will slow me down a little bit. At least I'm not walking around with everything I got and putting, all of it on number 7 at the spinning wheel or whatever.
Yep.
Basically, the first step is this is awful. Second step is there's a solution. And the third step is I need to trust the process. And then I go into inventory. Fourth step is we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. I can write about those people I'm resentful at, but that's as much as I can get. I'm resentful at because they did this, they did this. But in reality, normally those people are just responding to me stomping on their toes or kicking them in the teeth or whatever.
Sure.
And I get mad because they retaliate and hold it against them forever. When I instigate, and even if they didn't start it, I'm participating, So yep. I'm resentful at these people. This is the cause. And what does it impact? It impacts my marriage. It impacts my social life. It impacts my life, period, because I'm letting these people control me in ways that tick me off, and I go get loaded at them, which is killing me so that they can get sick.
So the fourth one's kind of accountability.
So I start figuring out what's good about me, what's bad about me, and what do I need to work on.
Yeah.
And I take that to somebody else. I call the fifth step is we admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. I'm a thief, a liar, a dope fiend. When I'm in my cups, I'm willing to do anything to stay there. And I have to be as willing to do anything to stay away from that now. And so, once I've admitted those things, and I look for my sponsor would help me pick out of that inventory. It's a written inventory, my character defects. What are these defects of character, and what are the things that are, most everything in an inventory and in your character defects are things that are naturally ingrained in human beings. It's just ours are a little bit skewed beyond normal.
Yeah.
And so we try to get them back into balance. And then the seventh step is we humbly ask them to remove our shortcomings. Shortcomings is the things that I don't follow through on. It's got a lot to do with those same character defects from the other step, but it's the things that I don't follow through on. And I need to follow through on things in order to gain my own self-respect, in order to gain other people's respect. And then
what would be an example? Like just mundane tasks, or maybe you not showing up for people on time, or
7, 8, about 10 years ago, my daughter, who's 40 some odd years old, I think that's even probably older than you,
39.
came out to Florida, and she wanted to go to Disney for her birthday. Now, she was at that point still single. I guess it was probably maybe 15 years ago. She was still single, didn't have the kids, blah, blah, blah. So she comes to see me in Florida. I'm living in Titusville. Orlando's like 45 minutes away to Disney. She can get in for free. She just wants me to go with her. We go. We had a wonderful time. I rented a chair so I didn't have to walk around all the time because, like I said, I had some issues and I've got orthopedic issues from like car wrecks and things. And anyway, we had a wonderful time. We did the whole deal. You know, I had to pay for parking and blah, blah. But basically, we just lived it up, just her and me, right? And then at the end of the day, we get back into the car to come home. And she says, "You finally paid it off." And I'm like, "What?" And that day, when I was on my way to go to work, I didn't mention this because I'd forgotten about it, just like that.
Sure.
We were supposed to use that money that I blew on that run to go to Disney in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
Her, me, and her mama. And she may have been a kid then, but it stuck. And I had to pay it off when we were in Orlando, you know, and she finally got to go do the deal. And she wanted to do it with me because I'm more fun than her mom. I'll ride the roller coasters. I'll do the crazy stuff, you know. So,
right.
So, and
how does that make you feel?
When she first mentioned it, I felt really small. And then at the same time, but she was like letting me off. It's like, but you've made the amend. Now it's good. You know, now I expect you to come be part of your grandkids' lives, you know, and do that. And so I'm working really hard to make sure I'm part of their lives. We visit each other a couple times a year. I'm going to get her kids out for camp this summer. They got a couple of camps at the coal mine exhibition. I'm going to look for some other things over at Concord or maybe WVU or Tech or whatever's got some things, you know.
Yeah.
We did all kinds of stuff like that when we were in Florida with the grandkids from up here because they were, my wife was plugged in with Florida Tech University in Melbourne. And they had camp for kids, science camp. They'd take them out and do benthic crap and all kinds of other stuff in the Indian River Lagoon and go out and clean beaches. And
oh, nice.
They did all kinds of weird stuff, you know. And same thing with the camp over here, you know. So we want to just get them out. Basically, though, it's spending a month or so with the kids. You know, they're old enough now that we can start bringing them both out here, hanging out with them. You know, I'm retired. I've got nothing but time. I mean, I do work a couple of 3 days at the coal mine place during the season.
Right.
But in reality, you know, I took that because I love the history of this place. And I loved what I'm doing. I get to live history and I'm having a blast.
It's chock full of history. These mountains
have to do it, and they treat me like gold over there. So they'll let me have any time I need off.
That's awesome. Kids. That's a good place. Beckley Exhibition Coal Mine. Anyone who hasn't been, highly recommend you go.
Yeah.
So shortcomings, and then
it's the 8th step list, making your amends. The people you need to make amends to, and the 8th step basically is we made a list of all people we'd harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. That's the only part of the 8th step. You're not even supposed to think about the 9th step. It's just made the list. And then start looking at the list and saying, I need to be willing to. And a lot of those people, if you're resentful at enough, that's going to take you a while to become willing to make amends to those people.
Sure.
But you make amends, and making amends isn't just going up and saying, I'm sorry. You know, if I stole $52,000 from you, I need to set up a payment plan.
Oh, yes.
Making amends is trying to mend the fence so that it actually works again, you know, and putting things back together.
Right.
And you may never be friends again, but
that's okay.
But that's okay. I need to clean up my side of the street. I've walked into some of those where people were so hostile, they wanted me out of there. I walked into some of those that they were still scared of me for some reason, you know, and like, I'm not the man I used to be.
Yeah.
You know, But once upon a time, they probably had good reason to be afraid of me.
But you understand it. You're like, okay.
So I understand it, and I understand that, but I do need to talk to you about this, and I try to get it out as best I can. And they say, good, you got it out, now leave, I don't want to be part of it.
Sure.
So, but you do the best you can with what you got, and people still pop up. I was 20 some years clean. Told you about going to California to go think and hang out with my daughter. I still go to meetings. So I go to meetings, and I was talking about, I used to run this place, and produce company down here in a cooler. And, eventually, I was started out as a truck driver. I ended up running the place, blah, 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 and management. And they've ended up, that was where I got strung out again on coke, and I blew the job, and I always feel like I owed amends to, Joe and some of the people, the owners. And all of a sudden this kid came up at the end of it all, and he says, do you remember Lauren? And I'm like, Lauren. And all of a sudden the tumblers fell. He was the grower. And by the time I had gotten fired from that place, they were a little late and tardy in doing it, because I had half the sales force strung out, and Lauren was, probably caused a lot of economic damage on the side. And he didn't make it onto my list because I'd stone cold forgot about him until 20 some years after the fact. And I have not caught him yet. But every time I go out to California, I try to look him up to see if I can make amends to him too. So,
yeah.
But so just because I think I'm done, it's a process. It's ongoing forever. And then the 10th step is, on a daily basis, I need to inventory my day. How did I do? Who have I ticked off? Who do I owe amends to? Have I done things right? Have I done things better? Am I still looking at old behaviors popping back up?
Sure.
11th step is I seek God's will and the power to carry that out. I'm trying to align my thoughts and my behaviors and the things that I'm supposed to be doing, which may not be necessarily what everybody else thinks I should be doing, but I'm looking for what God wants me to do. I don't really care about people as much as what the only opinions I really care that much about right now is my wife's and Pastor Jason and Chris at church, and Sam, the folks that take care of the church stuff. And I try to always give them as much time as I can as well. So
sure.
I am one of those people that I don't just try to give them 10%. I told everybody from the very beginning, I can't do this halfway. I can't be a Sunday Christian. I got to be in it all the way. And that's 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So if they need something, I'm on call. We've gone down and given food out and stuff when they had Carpenter's Corner open down here.
Yeah. It's with Salvation Army now, isn't it? Right? Yeah, I've been down. I've volunteered there a couple times.
And it's pretty lightweight, but and I can't be on my feet a long time, and I told them that, but our outreach pastor says, well, I'm looking for somebody like you because you're not afraid to go and sit down at the tables with these people and talk to them, and that's essentially, that's what I do, is I stop and talk to people, and I try to reach out to people. And so I had a niche, just for them. And we started the 12-step Bible study their biblical 12-step study in Florida, and it turned into a monster. The church down there has like 20 groups, and I mean, it's just turned into.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I mentioned that a few times to Jason, what we did down there. And he's our lead pastor. And so he said, well, we need to pray on it. So we did for about 1.5 years, 2 years. And then he told me I needed to clean up a couple of things. One of them was he wanted me to quit smoking, which I got a resentment about. I mean, it's one thing when I think that I need to quit smoking, but when somebody starts,
sure, yeah,
but it's like, it's funny when I got over that. He never mentioned it again. The only mention of it was me with my resentment. And then I finally got past that, and I'm driving down Robert C. Byrd, and there's only one gas station in the city that sells my cigarettes. It's the Exxon station down the Robert C. Byrd in, I guess that would be Crab Orchard. And one day I'm on my way and I'm lighting up a cigarette, and I said, man, I'm going to run out tonight. I better stop and buy a pack. And that little voice in the back of my head says, why don't we run out and see what happens?
Right.
going on about a year and a half now. I bought a big bag of Lifesavers, fruit flavored, and like 2/3 of it is still sitting by my nightstand. I did that for about a week, but other than that, I've never touched. I don't vape. I don't do any of that stuff anymore. And I didn't go through any really hard, severe withdrawals or anything, and I've smoked for 50 some years. Why would God let me off the hook that easy? And I was like, well, because Jason wasn't going to probably let me get this class started if I didn't.
Yeah.
And it's funny because now I hug smokers. I'm a huggy person. I don't handshake a lot.
Sure.
I give you a handshake because we only never met before.
Right.
I'm the type of guy, if you aren't paying attention, I'll walk up. If you're bald headed like me, I'll come up and kiss you on top of the head.
Nice.
You in the pew. so it's that really thrills some coal miners right here.
Oh yeah.
I got some really big burly men who are just lovey. It's the most loving place I've ever been. But our church is really spectacular. I brag about it a lot, but
yeah.
But anyway, God let me off of that. The other thing he was really wanting me to do was profanity, and I sometimes will still slip.
It's a tough one.
But I did that pitch in the AA or the NA convention at Ripley.
Mm-hmm.
I was telling you about with 1,000 people. I'd never done that, and I was freaking out over it, because it's not like I'm any more or less interesting than them. It's the point that, I just never done it. And that's a whole lot of people being in front of you. And I don't know most of them.
Right.
I don't know half of them.
It's nerve wracking.
But one thing I do know is every one of them's been just like me at some point, and most of them want what I have because I have more time than way more most people, So, I did that. And it's funny because my biggest concern over it, I had people back here praying for me because my biggest concern was, when I'm in meetings, sometimes that's where it slips out because I'm hanging around with a whole lot of other people who are profane, and I'll start.
I thought you were going to tell me, I dropped the F-bomb in front of 1,000 people.
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Once. I'm in it, and at the end of that big run, I told you about it. I didn't tell you the rest of the end of the story, but basically, when he threw me out of his house, I realized I've been up for a week. I have no idea how this even started, what happened, And so I called up my then sponsor. It wasn't Bobby; it was this other guy that lived on the 17th hole in Pebble Beach.
Oh, nice.
And I said, Gordon, I don't know what happened. I need to come see you. I need to talk to you. And he's like, come on over. So I showed up, and it's like 20 miles to the peninsula, Monterey Peninsula. And I talked to him I was trying to explain to him that I don't know what happened, and it scared me. What he was hearing was, I need you to call my wife and tell her that it's not my fault. I didn't have any intentions of having him call my wife. I figured that was my problem. I didn't worry about that part. I was trying to explain to him, but he had it in his mindset that was what I was going to do. And so that's all he would hear, and gave me that sponsorly advice. Go home, don't drink or use nothing, and call me tomorrow. And so I headed out like as if I wasn't probably already really imbibed after being up a week. I mean, good Lord, I was still pretty blasted.
Sure.
But I hit the road heading back to Salinas from there. And on the way back, it did dawn on me that I got to see her. And I do have to explain where have I been for the last 11 days or whatever. So I'm like running every scheme in my head, trying to figure out something to tell her. And I totaled out her car because on the way home, I'm running up Blanco Road in Salinas doing 65 miles an hour, which is normal. And a semi truck is up there ahead, and he pulls into the left turn lane. And he's getting ready to go into Driscoll Strawberry. And I knew he was up there, but I knew I had it right away, and I'm doing 65 miles an hour. It was no big deal. I figured he would stop. Meanwhile, my cigarette lighter popped. I reached down, I pulled it out, lit my cigarette, tapped it on the ashtray, stuck it back in, looked up, and I swear that truck was like from here to the wall.
Mm.
And I said, you're dead, and crossed my legs and let go of the steering wheel and just watched it happen. Watched the engine come through the windshield and then go on behind me. The stereo flew past my head out of the dash. I mean, it was spectacular. I've never done any wrecks that weren't spectacular.
Went full sail, all of them.
But it was like, I thought I was going to be dead. And instead, this trucker came around the corner. I was driving a brand new 1988 Mazda 323. It's a roller skate and a hatchback. And the trucker came around, and I just rolled the window down about that far because I was smoking, right? So got to have the window down. And he came around, and he looked in the window, and he said the most ignorant thing I ever heard. He said, "Are you okay?" And if I could have moved, I'd have got out and killed that man. I wanted to beat something up because I was still here. And that was the only profane thing that I said in that pitch was when I got to that point. And I'd already given the website to Jason and the pastors at church. And so I didn't really catch it, but I had a feeling I might have, and sure enough, I did. And they said, and Jason said, "Oh, yeah, I heard that, but I figured you were just quoting what you said." And I said, "Well, that's exactly what I said." And he said, "Well, sounds to me like it was just a quote." I mean, he just let that one go. But, it still does pop from time to time. But I do try to be better. I strive to be a better person on a daily basis, And the more I can align my thoughts and God's thoughts together and send me out the door, that's how things work for me,
Yep.
So that's my profanity and my smoking. For some reason, the profanity is gone for the most part, but not all.
Right.
And the smoking's been gone totally. I don't.
Good for you.
Once in a while, a cigar thing talks to me, but it's got to be a good one.
I quit. Let's see, about 15 years. I quit smoking to dip. Then I quit dipping when I got an office job because I didn't want a spit bottle laying around and everyone to look at it,
Yep.
So, well,
so I grab it thinking it's a Coke.
Yeah. Well, my wife, yes, and that's kind of part of it too. She's like, "I'm not drinking one of your spit bottles again. You gotta stop." But yeah, did we hit 12?
No, we got to 11, and that's prayer and meditation. The 12th step is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of doing the other 11 steps.
Mm-hmm.
We continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it, and tried to carry this message to other addicts. And that's the ongoing thing and it says, and also to practice these principles in all our affairs, which is the loop that takes me back where sometimes I'm powerless over that car I'm driving, or I'm powerless over that 1,000 people I'm about to go talk to, and I can't stop it because I've committed, and I don't want my character defects to be that I don't show up when I'm committed, and there's a lot of things I can be powerless over these days,
Yeah.
But if I align my thoughts and my actions with the way God would want me to act and behave and the things that He wants me to do, I'm perfectly fine, And if I screw things up, there's enough people around me that'll let me know. I surround myself with people that know me. Some can see me from the outside better than I can myself. And my best friend in Lewisburg, I'm closer to him than probably any man I've ever been involved with besides Bobby and my wife, and I've got maybe 5 friends that are that way across the country. I've lived from coast to coast now clean. I've lived from California to Florida to Texas, Missouri here. And I've got friends and people that I can talk to about anything, even the madness that pops up into my head. And it does pop up. I don't keep a gun in the car because traffic can get to me.
Sure.
There's some real jerks out there.
Yep.
So there's a guy in an orange Jeep that I would have shot probably 3 years ago who kept coming out of the side roads and jumping in front of me on my way home. And then he would flip me off if I flashed a light, honked, or anything else.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I had a gun, I'd have tracked you down, boy. I'm too old to fight.
Yeah.
That's exactly why I don't keep a gun in the car.
Sure. Well, and plenty of narcissists and sociopaths out there for sure. So I totally agree. So I guess wrapping it up, what would you have to say to someone who's struggling, who just thinks, it's just not going to be possible for them? Does it get easier as you go, or what kind of advice would you give?
It ain't easy, but it's worth it. And there are people who will walk with you all the way through it. And the resources that are available are phenomenally more accessible than they were when I got clean. I went into a 30-day treatment. That used to be long-term treatment. There's some now that last a year and a half. They'll still be walking with you 2 years later in aftercare and stuff.
Wow.
There's all kinds of things out there that are helpful. Doesn't have to be 12-step. Doesn't have to be religious based. You don't have to be a Christian. But you gotta. It all starts with abstinence. If you can't give it up, it's not going anywhere. Hit a detox. Check yourself into some place where you can be safe for a while and learn that there's a different way to live, and go from there, man. Because my first 10 years were as radical as some of my past years before that. But, it's worth it. I've got a lovely home outside of Leicester and in a place called Hoo Hoo Holler that people from California to Florida still are amazed to think that only in West Virginia can you have a Hoo Hoo Holler.
Greatest state on earth.
I've got a beautiful wife who loves me to death, despite the fact that I'm a man and men are jerks, and that's just kind of the way we are. But I do love her to death. I've got, the things I've got are on the outside are just phenomenal. To think of where I left to my own devices, I'm a low down, dirty dope fiend, and the grace of God and these people. I have one of the most fabulous lives that I can imagine, and there's still heartache and there's still step backs. My kid decided to run away from home at Christmas time and go live with her boyfriend on the other end of the county. I don't have any real grudges against the kid, but it is kind of irritating that she had a full ride to Marshall. I mean, full ride. She had everything. She even had money in the bank so you could go have coffee on. And,
right.
She walked away from it to go live with this guy. And
life.
Yeah, life happens, And, it don't happen always the way you want it to. But it all works out the way it's supposed to. And even with her making a stupid mistake like that, hey, I was a lot harder kid to raise than she was ever been. So,
oh yeah,
and so is my wife.
No offense, but sounds like it.
Yeah. We're hoping she comes to dinner tonight.
Right.
So.
Well, I hope so too. I'm so grateful for you giving me this story. I feel very grateful to have heard it, and I'm glad you're here. You look great.
I appreciate it.
Considering all this craziness.
Yeah.
But yeah, so glad you're here. For everyone else, be sure to subscribe to Creepalachia on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're also on TikTok. Be sure to reach out to me if you have a story you would like to tell that fits the show. Please email me at creepalachia@gmail.com. And until then, everyone out there, stay safe, stay warm in this snowstorm especially, and finally, long live Appalachia.